What is up, folks? We are back with another episode, and this one will be a little spicy. This one will be a little unconventional because this topic doesn't necessarily get talked about that often, and that is liberal racism. And so, whenever you bring up the topic of racism, usually the conversation is surrounded by extremists, people who use the N-word and people who, it's the alt-right and, the good old boys, those people, when you bring up this conversation. But you never really hear the term liberal racism, or as Robin DiAngelo coined it, nice racism. So, me reading both of her books, it made sense to me, and it's something that I personally could relate to because never in my life have I been explicitly called the N-word, or, have I experienced explicit racism. It's always been colorblind racism from people that I was around on a daily basis. But before we get really into the podcast, I want to introduce my guest, Garrett. How are you?
Good. Hey, thanks for having me. I'm not sure if I can deliver on the spiciness, but I'm here to provide the very important white man perspective that everybody wants to hear on every issue.
So. All right. And a little background: we actually recorded this podcast already.
Yeah.
But I'm not naming the place, or I'm not trying to talk down on anybody's business, but it just wasn't what I expected out of the finished product with the audio and the visual and all that. So it's all good. We're here again. We kind of changed up the topic a little bit, but we're back.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, it's good that we're just having that conversation anyway.
Right.
It's not being recorded.
Right.
Something that we
so
talk about.
So personally, where to even start? It's it's just okay.
I could go into kind of where I grew up, and basically the picture example of somebody that grows up in the.
I was about to jump to my personal experiences, but we can wait to get there. So, how did you grow up? Your household? How was your household in regards to race? Your environment, your community. Where did you grow up? How was that? Were you around a lot of African Americans? All that.
Yeah.
Tell us.
So, I grew up in a suburb northeast of Houston. It's called Kingwood. But like most suburbs outside the city, it is majority white, and definitely grew up with the values of don't see color. Like just treat everybody the same. Don't see color. Mm-hmm. And, it's kind of funny looking back on it now. We really were colorblind because if you look around, there's no black people there. So I'm really not seeing color.
It's easy to be colorblind, right?
I'm actually not seeing color.
Right.
And at no point do you stop and wonder, there are no black people that live in my neighborhood.
Right.
Better not think about that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Better move on to something else.
So it wasn't even a part of your psyche having to have this relationship with a person of color, or learning how to interact with them, or what you should or should not do, wasn't even a part of your world growing up.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It wasn't focused. It wasn't a part of our socialization. So even, we had probably 10 to 20 black students at my school.
Mm-hmm. Out of 4,000 or something?
Out of several thousand. And
yeah.
So even, for them, I think being socialized in that environment maybe socialized them to not talk about, racism that they experience, or how race affects their lives. So
right.
It just never came up.
If you mind speaking on your experience growing up, watching how your parents interacted with race. I know you said that it was very colorblind, but did you see anything else that could have maybe contradicted it, or that could have backed up what they're saying? Just tell your experience from observing your parents. You don't have to put your parents' business out there, if you don't want to, but if you're comfortable.
No, just like everybody else that grew up in those communities.
Yeah.
I felt lucky at the time. I still feel lucky to an extent that, of course, my parents, even, acknowledging that the colorblind view is, really kind of a ridiculous thing to think,
Yes,
and
you must see
can
color.
even be counterproductive.
Mm-hmm.
They still at least had that ideal, I suppose. That,
Right.
but I guess where where the rubber meets the road, and you realize that even saying that isn't true is maybe not when I was growing up, but recently, like involving like Black Lives Matter protests and
MAGA.
MAGA, or even Obama's presidency.
Oh yeah, that was the precursor
You
to
know,
all this, really. Yeah.
Politics aside,
Mm-hmm.
and a big part of it is because of the socialization that they experience. The news they consume is all
Right.
Fox News, or now just Facebook memes
Mm-hmm.
and posts that just reinforce this toxic mindset. And so if all they're seeing on the news is
Mm-hmm.
Fox News just repeating one incident of something violent that happened at
Right.
a massive rally that had thousands of people,
Yeah.
they're not going to show any of it except the one violent incident, and then just show that on repeat. And so
Right.
that's, in their minds, they might be able to say, like, yeah, that what happened to George Floyd was horrible. That cop should be in prison. But at
Mhm.
the same time, we should also watch out about
Right.
the Black Lives Matter protesters,
Right.
because that's a big problem. Or even people that would absolutely say they weren't racist, like the things that people would say about Barack Obama, or even worse, Michelle Obama,
Mm-hmm.
prior to his election and then while he was in office, were just really disgusting things that,
Right.
even with how much everybody hates Hillary Clinton,
Mm-hmm.
I never saw the same types of insults thrown
Not
at
even
Hillary
close.
Clinton that I've seen thrown at Michelle Obama.
And at least with Hillary, you can back it up and say that there is a reason that you're being mean spirited to this person. But with Barack, it went beyond politics, and especially with Michelle, because she's not
Right.
even a politician.
Right.
So yeah.
And because so much of it, especially with Michelle,
Yeah.
would be around her looks,
Yeah.
which on the one hand is strange, because just like looking back on the history of like first ladies,
Mhm.
she, to me objectively was, one of the more beautiful first ladies we've had.
Right.
Like, even as much as I hate the Trumps, like I would never be tempted to be like, Melania Trump is so ugly.
No,
Like, she looks
you would
like a
never say
man.
that. Yeah.
And that was like the type of things that you would see, being said about Michelle Obama. And, even post Obama, like in a review of his presidency, I'm not a huge supporter anymore. At the time I was. I don't think he fulfilled his, promises to the level that I would have liked. And so none of, my critique of this is coming from a place of, that's my team. And
Bias,
that's why I
yeah.
want it. It was just the things that I would see said about him were just shocking. And so I think even people that think when they're saying these things, that's not coming from a racist place. It's like so obviously a reflection of some
deeply
sort of
embedded.
internalized
Yeah.
racism, that we just don't face.
So I'm curious to know and understand, we're talking about the trajectory of your life, and, you were raised up in this colorblind community. You didn't really have to be conscious of anything involving race, really, growing up. So, but me knowing you now, and I know how knowledgeable you are, how educated you are in a lot of things, but specifically in African American history, African American issues, things going on with the African American community. So, what was the push or the thing that got you interested in really deep diving into this?
Yeah, it's hard to pinpoint, anything specific as like a catalyst for that. But definitely learning like true history of this country. Certainly, like I don't know how it is everywhere else, but in the Texas educational system, what you learn growing up is mostly that, America are the good guys in all situations. We have, of course, we go over slavery. That was so long ago.
Yeah.
So unbelievably long
Now
ago.
we don't even teach it in schools.
And then after that, there's some hand waving at, Jim Crow.
Mm-hmm.
And then since then, you just kind of brush over everything else. And I think about even now, like how our history books are going to read about, the war in Afghanistan, and, how it's just going to pass over like the real like horror of
It'll be romanticized
of what we did there.
Right.
And so, along those same lines, it's never asked of you in these classes to, really face the idea that our country has been the bad guys that we see, China or Russia, or,
right.
In its own way. And, these things get so muddied because politically, we, politicians and the media create this culture war. And so, rather than just having like a normal conversation about let's teach real history, they create buzzwords like critical race theory or woke politics and all this like crap, so that people's attention spans are so short,
right?
And
especially now,
getting them attached to like these culture wars that they can fight in a few tweets, and then they can just develop this this mindset that they're not going to listen to that in any case, because they're trying to teach kids to hate our country and to be Marxists, and
right.
It's like, no, there's just a real history of this country that we didn't learn, and learning it would help us understand where we are now,
and not repeat it.
It's not about hating your country. It's about we're trying to build a better world. We're trying to build a better society all the time, and so it's impossible to do that when you're only going to learn about your country through this lens of everything we do is from the position of the good guy, and especially passing over so many of the instances of government racial policies that resulted in harm today, which is why discussions around, say, like reparations are so untouchable for so many politicians, because in the most recent discussion, I think even Mitch McConnell said, well, slavery was so long ago, nobody's alive for that today. And I just read a book. I can't remember what it's called. I'll have to look it up afterwards. But in his argument for reparations, slavery's not even part of it. Like,
you don't have to
being paid back for like
the housing,
the wage, the work done by slaves, was not part of the argument at all. It starts with the Homestead Act.
Yep.
During the westward expansion, all white families were given 100 acres of land in the Western Territories, and freed black people post-Civil War were promised 40 acres.
And a mule.
Already, and the mule.
Yeah.
But, they never got 1 acre after Lincoln was assassinated. Then Andrew Johnson canceled that policy. And so from there, there's to the present, there's a cascading series of events.
They had slave owners got reparations. Slavery got abolished.
Our government's paid reparations.
To almost a lot of groups that's gotten way less harm done to them compared to the African American race. They've gotten paid reparations. In my hometown, there is in Port Arthur, 9th Avenue, It's called Chinatown. That was reparations paid to Asians from war. We've been paying reparations to people, but when it comes to the African American issue, it's like,
But there's too much history there that even if I'd memorized it, it would be too hard to just regurgitate in an hour or less.
Oh, for sure.
But just that act alone, and then all the events since housing discrimination and GI Bill and the New Deal policies that excluded African Americans, all of those things have like direct influence on the wealth gap today that can be traced pretty directly, and you can put a monetary value on that. So we're not even including the wages that slaves would be paid, because it's an impossible number.
It really is. It's probably be in the trillions of dollars.
But in even without it, it's in the billions of dollars.
Exactly.
And which we can afford it. There's no question about that. But it's really just a basic legal case, in that he's viewing these specific instances of government policies from since slavery to the present, and each one of these things has this huge impact on the difference in wealth between the average white family and the average black family. And even like the Homestead Act,
which created
absurd,
the middle class pretty much.
Right. And an absurd amount of
Mm-hmm.
white people's wealth today, and some amount can be traced back to just that act.
Just that.
So something like over 100 million Americans can trace their wealth back to just that act.
Right.
And there's so many since that, most people have never heard of.
No,
And
exactly.
so,
Look, I'm a big proponent of not necessarily school education, just educating yourself. Because just like you said, a lot of people won't even they'll listen to this podcast and be like, I didn't even know that.
Right.
But it's just self-education that'll help a lot. But I want to get to this. Your thirst for knowledge, and you coming across these stories and this history, and you getting a better understanding of at least what African Americans have been through. How do you think that has shaped your relationships that you have with African American people?
That's a really interesting question. I think one of the main things is definitely from people on the right politically, or even white liberals, have always tended to view ourselves or whiteness as racially neutral.
Right.
And it's something that we don't consider as part of our identity because we've never had to.
Right.
And that's why when people talk about identity politics, they're talking about everybody else. We don't, I don't have identity politics.
Right.
I don't view things through the lens of my identity, which of course is a lie because, what if it's not identity politics, what is it when you are furious that Colin Kaepernick is not standing up for your favorite song?
Right.
That's, patriotism
Mhm.
and, support for, Blue Lives Matter. That's all identity politics.
Right.
And it just becomes even more ridiculous through the lens of, the fact that, Colin Kaepernick chose to kneel because he talked to a teammate of his that was a Green Beret that suggested to him, hey, I think kneeling would be a better idea than
Straight
staying
from
on
the military.
bench because then you can show respect to the military, which I think, even having to do that is a weird thing in our society. But even doing that, the reaction was still, he's disrespecting our military. He hates America. It's like, no, he's being very specific about
the reason is,
for.
and we're talking about liberal people who would say, I don't use the N-word, or they'll look at, an extremist racist and be like, I'm not that. You know what I mean? I'm not a bad person, but but when you won't come out straight out and say you don't agree with what somebody's saying or protesting, then you'll attack how they did it and where they did it.
Right.
So for a lot of liberal people, white people, it wouldn't be, it wouldn't be quote unquote politically correct for them to come out and say, I don't agree with Colin Kaepernick kneeling against police brutality.
Yeah.
So, I'm not going to say that. So let me say, I don't like the way he did it. Right. Because if you really agree with what he was saying, it wouldn't matter. Yeah. Especially when the man came out repeatedly and said, hey, I'm not disrespecting the military.
Right.
I asked a member of the military what to do. He told me to do this. And you have veterans who came out in support of Kaepernick.
Any of my friends in the military that I've asked, like, does that bother you? No. Why would it bother me? It has nothing to do with me.
Exactly.
And it's a weird gesture anyway. This, like I'm saying, that is an identity politics, this visceral reaction to somebody not being patriotic.
Right.
When even that on its own is like, for the last, 20 plus years, we've operated a torture island in Guantanamo Bay. That's a thing our country does.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just this, this blind loyalty to, we can have our discussions about politics, but support for the flag overall, and that's beyond reproach, is just strange. But
you, I don't want to interrupt you, but you, the people critiquing how somebody chooses to protest is unpatriotic.
Right. And it's a complete distraction.
Yeah.
If you want to argue what his point is,
right, that's a whole different story.
Do that. But
right.
Yeah, it's
exactly.
Again, they create this culture war to
Mm-hmm.
distract people rather than like we can have a normal conversation about it.
It's a lost art conversation that is.
You know, that's what I find most frustrating about politics, and especially people from the right that think that they don't use identity politics,
Right.
while they wage this culture war of what's basically a distraction from just facts we can talk about and issues we can discuss normally.
Right.
But to circle back to how I've changed, and the idea that white people view themselves subconsciously as racially neutral is,
right.
I guess an easy example would be maybe one of the first times, or even still, when we're hanging out like as a group, like me, you, Jay, James, Al, whoever, a lot of the places we'll go are generally more like black spaces.
Right.
It'll be because another thing that's just never talked about is how segregated we still are in society.
I think they had a statistic that said we're more segregated now, at least in schooling.
It could be true.
Probably just across the board than we were in the 60s, which is insane.
And like I said, it really never occurred to me as something to question growing up.
Right.
But so, we'll often spend a lot of our time in black spaces or, whatever it is, bars, restaurants that, are majority like black people that go there. And so definitely like my first time there, but even still, it's like sometimes I'll just feel like really for no reason, like, am I out of place here? Like, are people looking at me here and thinking, like, he shouldn't be here?
Right.
Like, like how do I walk as not racistly as possible? Like,
right. So now that you've been put in that position, you have a unique perspective, because the majority of white people never have to feel like the minority all across their life. But for us, that's the norm, because chances are we work in corporate America, it's going to be mainly white. All these spaces are majority white. And so we have to be, now you get to feel how we have to feel just in everyday life.
It's not even.
You're not even on that level.
There's really no reason for me to feel like
right,
that.
Right,
it's
right.
only being,
it's
being a minority in a space.
Right.
There is no larger structure of oppression.
Right.
That's
true.
Nobody actually.
That's true. So it's not even on the same level. So you get a little taste.
Treating me worse.
Right.
It's entirely just
right.
an emotional,
a mental thing
response. But it is still like it's something that like affects you.
Right.
And so. Then as you just mentioned, like the idea that for several centuries now in this country, we've built basically a giant white space in society. And as you said, most of our government, most of CEOs, billionaires,
across the board,
conference rooms have been built as white spaces, not just in majority, skin color, but also the way you're supposed to act or the way you're supposed to look.
Right.
Which is, I just watched even like things that seem trivial. Like, I watched some YouTube clip, and it made me think of like where I grew up, where it was a girl just calling around to every barbershop in the place that she lived, asking if they had any experience or ability to handle like 4C type curly hair. That that she has as a black woman, and not a single one said like they would know what to do with it.
Right.
And so, that's just a small example, but still, the idea of having to live your whole life in that kind of space is exhausting,
to say the least.
And that's why I think I mentioned last time, like and kind of reference to Robin DiAngelo's first book, White Fragility, which, I've even told you there's a lot of that I don't exactly agree with.
Yeah.
It does explain that so much is because white people viewing themselves as racially neutral, not having to view, their experiences through their identity, haven't had to develop that kind of emotional maturity around the subject of race that, black people have to develop.
It's never been you never had to have, even think that. And I had it's not really crazy, but when I had this thought, it kind of blew my mind. I was like, I have white people in my life that I know for a fact will step in front of a bullet for me, but are still racist. It's a crazy idea to wrap around your head, but that is just a fact. Like, you listen to them talk about certain things, and you'd be like, because it's really like I'm an anomaly. You know what I mean? It's just like it's me. Like they see me, like he's a good one. That's the thought process. Yeah. But no, I'm not a quote unquote good one. I'm just black. You know what I mean? Like there's no, they kind of make it like, oh, he's a rare breed in his race, but no, that's not the case.
Right.
But that thought just was crazy to me. Like they'll step in front of a bullet for me, but if they didn't know me and I was George Floyd, then they'll be like, he a thug. He did this. He did that. He did that.
Right.
Wow. And the reason I wanted to do this podcast on liberal racism or nice racism or about white people who think, because, the extremist gives them somebody to look down upon to make them still feel like they're good people. I'm not saying that, they're bad, when in regards to race, right? So they can say, I'm not like that. I would never use the N-word, but you still won't hire, black people in leadership, or you still won't, you know what I mean? So... And the white people I've been hurt by personally were those close to me.
Right.
I had a friend, and I'm just being completely transparent. So, people hear this and, whatever. Had a friend, my best friend, grew up, real close, stand together, real close to this man. Yep. And, when we got out of high school, and around the time, Trump and started coming about and all this, it just started revealing things that I've never seen, that I've never heard.
Yeah.
And it was like, and then obviously the friendship is no more, but that hurt me. You know what I mean? This is since middle school, you know what I mean? And it was a kind of separation from all his black friends. Yeah. You know what I mean? And it was like, dang. So with that, and we often have these relationships, right? Where we kind of let, a white person in and then boom. And, and now it's kind of like you have to pick and choose and you have to be very careful. You know what I mean? Like with you, like you're well studied. You're comfortable hanging around us. Like I know, the police come. I know you gonna step in the front. I know.
I did do that.
Yeah, you did. You know what I mean? So right. So I know, where you come from. Like, I feel like I can trust you, but I think that's a big thing for a lot of us is the trust thing. Like, should I? You know what I mean? Because even if your intentions are well, right, you can still get me killed, or you know what I mean, or not put me in a position when you really could have, you know what I mean, or something like that. And I work at a country club, which is the epitome of whiteness. Yeah. You know what I mean? You can't get more white than a country club. Mm-hmm. And for me, as one out of two, the only two black people, period, in the whole building, it's a very taxing. You know what I mean? To walk into work and overhear conversations and, oh, you're great, Khyrie. Yeah. But you're people. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, you're great. You're a good. They never came to me and said that. Yeah, but I'm just saying, but you can tell, like, you're great, but you're people. Yeah. You know what I mean? So it's very taxing. And even the good ones. Yeah. Even the good ones can be harmful. Right. You know what I mean? So it's a very taxing thing to navigate. And I don't even know where I was going with that, but I just wanted to get that off my chest and tell you and the listeners my experience and a lot of black people's experience when it comes to dealing with having relationships with white people. And I don't want to sound like all white people are, no, but it's just like that lack of understanding. You know what I mean? Like you said, like I have to go everywhere and know that I'm black. Yeah. You know what I mean? I have to be conscious of it. Yeah. When I step in a room, I'm conscious that I'm black. There's no other black people in this room. Yeah. And I even feel like I got to be a representation of my race. That is a weight that no white person has to carry. Yeah. You rule this world was made for you. Yeah. You know what I mean? So, yeah. So as a white person, and you're well aware of your privilege and you're as somebody who has relationships with African Americans and who cares about African American people, what are some things that you think you can do and that you are doing to um, not make things easier, it's not the right word, but to further, help our experience in America? I mean, I know you don't have like a huge platform to do,
Right.
you know what I mean? But even on your small platform,
Yeah.
what are you doing, or what do you think you can do to bring consciousness?
Yeah. I mean, just to start to put a final puzzle piece to that picture you just painted. I mean,
Yeah.
how you said, you feel like you do have to carry your race
Mhm.
everywhere, and it's like all it took was like me one time going to a bar with, where I was the only white person there, and
Yeah.
I'm immediately
Yeah.
aware that I'm the only
Right.
white
It's
person
like,
there.
yeah.
And and so I'm immediately aware of everything I'm doing, how I might be being perceived.
Right.
And it's this. Just to lead into then your next question, I think one of the better points made in that book, Nice Racism, is the idea that we're allowed to kind of maintain this system of, nice racism,
Right.
or or just indifference,
Mm-hmm.
without like seeing or understanding that, like, what we lose in doing that, even as non-Black Americans, just
Right.
what we lose, because it is such a like just even in my life, a basic concrete example would be like, if I were like listing the 10 like happiest moments in my life, half of them involve things we've done.
Right.
And
Yeah.
beyond that, just the identity, the fact that I could go to a bar that was, almost entirely, Black,
Mm-hmm.
and the fact that like I feel like out of place there, or I feel this like adversarial tension, like even if it's just in my head, is like
Right.
such a major consequence of what we lose when we don't have this like community, like we don't have this like sense of love for like everyone that lives around us.
Right.
And especially when we love to take just a few parts of Black culture that's formed in America, and we love to incorporate that, basically
Mm-hmm.
athletes, athletes until they express their political opinions, but as long as they want to win games for our team,
Right.
musical artists, even vernacular. It's like so much of Black culture than like.
I even hear this all the time. Basically the shut up and dribble notion. You know what I mean? Like, this owner is paying you all this money, and you're talking, or you want out,
Right.
but you'll never hear anybody talking about the amount of money that the owner is making,
Right.
or the amount of money that the player is making the owner.
Yeah.
No athlete, well, especially the major athletes, all of them are underpaid.
Yeah.
Because if you really pay them their true value, they never get paid their true value. LeBron never gets paid his true value.
Right.
If he got paid his true value, he'll be making $500 million a year.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, but you never hear anything about the owner. It's only the player needs to stay in his place because he's been privileged to have this big contract.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's it's an upsetting reflection of again what we've been raised to ignore about with the idea that we live in a colorblind society, and we know there's still, of course, everybody will say, of course, there's still racism, but as you said, in their head we're thinking of white nationalists, and we view racism in our mind as good and bad.
Right.
And so we're good people, so we're not racist, rather than, we all grow up with internal biases, and we've all been socialized. So if it helps you to think about it, it's not your fault.
Yeah.
But
exactly.
it is up to you what you do now.
Yep.
And you can't do anything if you don't recognize that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a big part, just as an individual, especially like a white man that has kind of done at least some of that work, is you can't shy away from those conversations with other people, because as we've talked about, how just me realizing how emotionally exhausting it must be to again be a black person in so many white spaces. You can't also then expect black Americans to then again continue doing all the work to explain themselves to white liberal society, who their own internalized biases are going to preclude them to hear it coming from a black voice oftentimes. And again too, it's just the emotional labor of it. It's I can't imagine undertaking that. But I think a big part of it is just standing up in those situations where it would be easier not to, because a lot of people there's this weird idea that in staying neutral in a political or social discussion, that there's some kind of virtue in that. I see both sides of the argument, and I wish we could just be nicer to each other.
Why can't we all get along?
Yeah, and I would love if everyone was nicer to each other, but there's no value in not taking a side. There's a right side and there's a wrong side, and you may not know exactly what that is, and obviously both sides think they're right, but again, just simply maintaining the status quo is not brave in any way, not challenging systems of power or the structure of our government that leads us into unnecessary wars and just horrific allocations of money and corruption, and either one being distracted by this culture war stuff, or again deciding not to take a side in any of it, because that's something you can do when you're a white person,
right?
And maybe you have liberal values, but it's something you can not take a side on. You can say that that police officer should go to jail, but Black Lives Matter is a violent organization and they're a threat. And
that's something also that started losing friendships when social media came about, and all of these police shootings and all this political stuff started coming at the same time. And you see people who you went to school with or that you are friendly with, and you hear their opinions. It's like, dang, okay. That's what we're doing. All right, that's how you really think, and it's kind of disheartening, to see that, because these are people you think are your friends. But I always say this, and I would never allow a white person to tell me that I'm a good black person, because I'm just a good person, whatever that means. I don't even believe in good and bad people, but just to go off of that, you know what I mean? I'm a good person. I'm not a good black person. Right. You know what I mean? There's not a shortage of good black people. You know what I mean? Yeah. So once you see that, man, it's kind of like, all right, it's the trust issues again. Yeah. It goes back to the trust issues.
And the response to this visceral agitation caused by what they would call identity politics, or again just having to talk about racism, is we don't like being viewed as white people. Yeah. We don't like being identified by our skin color. That doesn't feel good.
I'm an American.
So no shortage of irony there, that one second of that, and we're really sick of it. And it's again because things get so toxic, and the culture war side of it, people don't realize when we're hanging out, this isn't what we're talking about all the time. It's not the only thing on our mind. It
really never comes up, actually.
As a black man, Khyrie, would you like to go get a beer with me, a white man?
Yeah.
It's not.
Or would you rather Hennessy?
It's not this fear that's built up about critical race theory and things like that. It's not. It's just about understanding that you have been socialized, and there's parts of your psychology that are just an obvious consequence of growing up how you did, and those things are subconsciously affecting like the way you think, and even if you're sure that it's not happening to you, then it's happening in society already. There's no shortage of sociological studies of like applications where people would use what obviously seemed like a black name and a white name, or college admissions. We've done countless examples of this in which people that I'm sure would identify as non-racist continually favor white names, white faces, and it's it's just hard to kind of bend that mirror back in front of you to realize it's not about hating yourself as a white person or feeling white guilt or any of that. It's look, we have a problem, and like let's work to fix it. Yeah. And
it's just people just need to understand duality. Like, you can be a quote-unquote liberal and still be racist. And you can have a daughter and still be sexist. You know what I mean? You can. It's the duality. You can be simultaneously two things at the same time. Just because you never call anybody the N-word doesn't mean you're not racist. Right. Actually, and there's proof to back me up on this. It is the nice white person that does the most harm to African Americans in present day. Now, but in present day, though they do the most harm. Yeah. They are the ones that, run these companies, holding the diversity training and all this, but you don't have nobody in your leadership, nobody in any high positions that's of color, it's your friends that you've grown up with, and you start hearing, how they really feel. It's really the quote unquote nice white people. And it's like, going back to the country club real quick, you just have to walk in and things get brought up to you that for a fact that your white coworkers never have to hear. Right. You know what I mean? Like, just the assumption that I voted for Biden because I'm black. Right. You know what I mean? Yep. Like, that is the assumption of it. You know what I mean? Like, you see, they come up to me and start talking about Biden. How do you know I like Biden? Yeah. Do I not? Even Joe Biden would call himself a nice white person. He did, he said he did civil rights stuff. He did all this and blah, 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 blah. But he got on a Breakfast Club and said, if you don't vote for me, you ain't black. Yeah. What? You know what I mean? So it's all these things. I'm gonna give you the last word because we gotta get out of here in 3 minutes, because Garrett is so dedicated to this black cause that he showed up 30 minutes late, like a black person would. So you go.
Let's cut that.
So I'm gonna give you the last word and go.
The last. All right. It's hard to tie a bow on that because we could spend all day talking.
This could be a 2, 3, 4 parter because it's so
and
fast.
On each one of these points, I feel like I could just go off on a tangent about
exactly
any given thing, and about how that's kind of obvious in other parts of American society. And we didn't even get into some of the things we wanted to talk about last time. Really, like reparations. We touched on it a little bit, but how that would look, and because I think for that too, like if that were to ever happen, it would have to be direct payments, something that banks or debtors, like student debt or anything like that, something that outside forces couldn't get their hands on because everybody would come calling for it. Yeah. Or other things I would like to see, like universal health care, and just the idea that uplifting everyone in a society makes everyone's life better.
Fannie Lou Hamer, nobody's free until everybody's free.
Right.
Yeah.
And, so much of, nothing personal wealth is never going to make you happier than living in a community where, like, you feel
It's cohesion.
yeah, where you feel like love, where you feel this,
Right.
this bond with the people that live around you, and that applies, to everybody, and we can talk about that, and a lot of those things would include, uplifting Black Americans as, the historically most oppressed and therefore the most underrepresented economically now, but also, beyond that, just understanding our specific history regarding how this country's treated Black Americans,
Right.
and atoning for that, because it's the right thing to do, and what we can fix, we should. I wish we had some more time, but
I know, right?
it's too many ideas.
We'll have to have a part 2, but for sure. But thank you for coming on. I just thought you would be the perfect person to bring on for this topic, because you don't only talk the talk, you walk the walk, so to speak. And to my white listeners who would say you're a nice person, some of advice is, one, divorce this idea of being a good person, because with that idea, it kind of keeps you safe and it doesn't allow you to grow. And stop comparing yourself to extremists, because that's also something that keeps you comfortable, because at least you're not that, right? So if you're serious about helping out your African American friends or just African Americans at large, get educated. That's the number one thing. Once every white person I talked to and I brought things to them that was serious about, really learning and really, doing the work, because if I presented this information to somebody who was going to be stuck in their ways anyway, it wouldn't matter. But the ones that I presented this information to that really were curious and they got to see all of this, they immediately was like, whoa, I had no idea. And so education is important. For the extremists out there that might be listening, which I doubt it if you are, but if you are, therapy is very important, because if you are an extreme racist, you need help. I'm a big proponent of therapy across the board, but especially for extremists, go get some help. Go get some therapy. Even for the quote-unquote nice white people, there are inherent biases, like Garrett said, in you, passed on from generation to generation to generation to generation. Even if you consciously don't feel like you feel a certain way about Black people, there are things inside of you. It's undoubted. Go get therapy. You know what I mean? Go get therapy. Get that out of you. Get educated, and divorce the idea of being a good person, because that hinders you from growth. So there it is. Thank you, Garrett, for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
We'll probably do a part 2 to this. We have to, because there's so much to cover.
Yeah.
And next time I'm going to tell you that the podcast starts an hour earlier. And but yeah, I'm just kidding. But yeah, guys, we're out. Peace.